Hi, I'm Rick Rockershausen with Grid Connect, and today I'm going to give a brief tutorial on how to use the Procentec Profibus Troubleshooting Toolkit Ultra Plus. For our demonstration today, we'll use the Profibus Troubleshooting Toolkit Ultra Plus. We'll also use our Profibus training kit that we use to do troubleshooting and maintenance training using the ProfiTrace tools. In this training kit you'll see we have a PLC down here and then 5 devices around the back lid of the case. And lastly, of course, we'll need a Windows PC running ProfiTrace software. Inside the toolkit you will find the ProfiCore Ultra. That's the black hardware module, the only piece of hardware you really need. And then a couple of cables to interface this hardware to your Profibus network. We have the tap cable here that connects to the ProfiCore Ultra. And then we also have a USB cable that connects from the other side of the ProfiCore Ultra into your PC or laptop. In addition, you'll find inside the training kit a user's manual that gives a lot of the details about how to use the software. To connect your ProfiCore Ultra to your Profibus installation, you attach the tap cable to your ProfiCore Ultra, and then the USB cable runs off the other side. Then you simply take your tap connector and put it on the back of an existing connector on your installation. Here we have a piggyback or a PG connector on this cable coming out of the PLC. So I will just attach the ProfiCore Ultra to the back of that, and in this case I want to make sure that my terminating resistor is in the off position. Okay, so we've connected our ProfiCore Ultra to the training kit and we're ready to launch the ProfiTrace 2 software. So we go to our programs, select ProfiTrace v2.7, that's the latest version. And then we click again on ProfiTrace v2.7. Don't choose the one that says for Combricks. That's for a different product, and we can talk about that in a future video. So this is the start screen for ProfiTrace 2. And here is the main screen for ProfiTrace. Across the top here you'll see the typical menu, drop-down menus that are typical of all Windows applications. And then underneath are the buttons and screens specific to ProfiTrace. Now ProfiTrace has several optional components in the software. Every package includes the screen you see before you, which is ProfiTrace. There's also one called Scopeware. There's one called Bar Graph. These two, Scopeware and Bar Graph, are sold as a single license together. Another one called Topology Scan. Network Manager is included in everything, and ProfiCaptain is yet a third, or yet another optional part of the software. The kit that we are talking about today, the Troubleshooting Kit Ultra Plus, does not include ProfiCaptain, so we won't spend any time on that today, but I may show you a couple small things about it. Okay, back to ProfiTrace, which is the screen that is in every kit that we sell. The option of the software. So, to begin, we click on this button that says Init ProfiCore Ultra. And you notice it is initializing the ProfiCore Ultra, basically checking the firmware version that's loaded in the Ultra to make sure it's the latest firmware, and then it begins to detect the baud rate of our installation. And you'll notice here we have 5 boxes in this matrix here, grid, that are in green with a blue number in the background. We have another one with a white background and a red number up here with a 2. This matrix is what's known as the live list, and it shows the addresses that are available in Profibus. So we have Profibus address 0 down to Profibus address 126. And so this is the maximum number of addresses available according to the Profibus specification. Anywhere that ProfiTrace, it's listening to the bus, anywhere that it senses a device communicating, it will put it in whatever address it's communicating from, put it in that box. And in this case we have these 5 slave devices, and if you'll recall back to the quick video of the training kit, you'll remember we had 5 slave devices. And also the red number 2, that would be our our master or PLC. So you'll see these devices, they're all in green. This means that they are in normal data exchange with the master. And they are just basically, the master is writing outputs, reading inputs in cyclical fashion to these devices, and they're all in data exchange. And this is a live list, meaning what we see on the screen is what's happening right now. So to show you how that works, I'm going to reach over and turn off one of the devices in our training kit. It does have, we do have little on and off switches for each device to make it easy. And you'll notice here a little blinking red light, then the word Phoenix contact, and then it turns to yellow. So the yellow means that the device was on the bus communicating, but then it has suddenly stopped, which makes sense because I turned the power off. So the device is no longer communicating with the master. And Profitrace senses this and changes the background color to yellow. You'll also notice that it did pop the name Phoenix contact into the box, and if I click on that Phoenix contact, it gives me some information about this device over here on the left info panel. This is the info panel, and you notice I mentioned the live list. That's this screen with the matrix and a little red heart here to the left of the word live list. And so this gives me information about this Phoenix contact, and the red blinking corner square that was in the corner here indicated that the device was sending a diagnostic message. So what happened when I turn it off, that Phoenix I/O block that we have in our training kit has some capacitive power that remains, if it loses power, just long enough so it can tell the PLC that, hey, I've lost power. And if you look at the information panel over here, you'll notice that it says low voltage sensor supply US1. So basically, it noted that it lost power. It raised the diagnostic flag in its messages. The master saw that, asked for the diagnostic message, and then, of course, it didn't have enough power to keep living, so it dropped off the bus. And what we see before us then is the yellow thing. Why did the word Phoenix contact suddenly appear? Well, Profitrace is listening to the bus, and every device manufacturer for each one of their types of devices is assigned what they call an ident number. Now, an ident number is just a way to identify each device of a particular type. So let's say a Siemens ET200S, every one of those devices has the same ident number. And what each manufacturer does is create a file called a GSD file. That file contains information all about the device, how many words of inputs and outputs it has, information about what types of diagnostic messages it supports, and so on. Also information about who the manufacturer is and all that good stuff. Well, what happens is when a diagnostic message is generated, the ident number is included in during that time. And once Profitrace sees the ident number, it will go look in its folder of GSD files to see if it has one that matches that ident number. And then it can know what device that was that just got power turned off. When we plugged it in, the devices were all in data exchange when we first started Profitrace. And so they weren't transmitting their ident number, and so Profitrace, of course, did not know anything but the address they were transmitting their messages to and from, and could not tell us that at that point it was a Phoenix contact. Not until it saw the ident number did it realize, aha, this is a Phoenix contact. So now we know the information. I'm going to flip this switch back to on, and we'll see just about simultaneously that the device turns green again. You'll also may have noticed down here at the bottom, this is a special device in our training kit from Acme Corporation. Basically, it's a device that Procentec created for purposes of training. And it, for our troubleshooting classes, it's a way to let students discover that this device has power that follows another device when it powers off. So it had a little power glitch from that, and during that time, of course, once again, we saw the ident number for our fake device here, the Acme device, and we were able to look up its GSD file, which of course was created, and so that's what we know about that. So if I turn off the other devices in turn, you will also see that they will turn yellow. I turned that one on and off too fast. I'll turn it off. Diagnostic. Now it'll go yellow. And then I'll turn it back on. the Brad, we'll turn that one off. And you'll see it turned yellow. It did not do the diagnostic at the beginning, so we don't know what it was because it doesn't have capacitive power. But when I turn it back on, when it starts up during the sync, when it starts back up as part of the initialization process, it does give its ident number, and so we knew what it was when it came back on the bus. The last device on my network is this Turk, and you'll see that it does have a little capacitive power, and so was able to get off that diagnostic message before it totally lost power. Okay, so now we see our 5 devices in green with the device names in there. And if, like I said, if you click over here, you can find out the information about those devices in the info panel just by clicking on them individually. Okay. The next thing I want to mention to you is that there is a place where the GSD files are saved. You can go up here to the settings menu and go to preferences, and here is the directory where you can say that your GSD files are. So you can add your own. Let's say if you had a step 7 software with GSD files, you could point Profitrace to your directory with those GSD files, or you can use the standard directory that's under the Profitrace software in the program files part of your Windows C drive. Okay, so that's, I just wanted you to see that. As I mentioned, this is a live list, meaning what's going on the network right now is what we see. So if you and I had just walked up to this installation and looked at it, we would see everything green and perhaps think that there's nothing wrong with this installation. But really what we are seeing is a real-time representation of what's going on right now. We don't know what happened 5 minutes ago. We don't know what happened an hour ago by looking at this screen. But fortunately for us, Profitrace includes a statistics function, and so there are these little tabs across here that change what's shown in the main window here. As I mentioned, we're looking at the live list. I'm going to scoot over here to the station statistics view and click on that, and you'll see here that we have this thing called syncs going on here. This is a sync statistic, and what it's showing me in the box is how many times each of these devices took a sync message. Now, a sync message is sent out by the master whenever a device drops off the bus, and it's trying to bring it back. I like to refer to it as the "Are you there?" message. So the master, every time it's time to talk to the device that's missing, instead of sending its normal write outputs and read inputs back, it would just send a sync message. Basically, it says, "Are you there?" When the device gets power back or is returned to the bus, of course it will answer, and then the master will put it back into data exchange on the next cycle. So that's what you see here with the sync. So it kind of tells us that we've had some problems on this network, because we know if there's a sync message, it means that the message that the device has been missing. And you may remember that we turned off the Phoenix at address 15 for quite some time, a bit longer than the rest of these. So it, in that few minutes we had it powered off, recorded 68,000 sync messages in our 1.5 megabits a second network here. Another one that I like to look at is the station loss. It's a little simpler. And again, it shows you how many times the device dropped off the bus. Okay? If you remember, I turned the Siemens on and off very quickly before it even had a chance to turn yellow, so I turned it off a second time. That's why we show 2 there. Okay? And again, our Acme down here is following a couple of these devices when they lose power, so it also shows a 2. Okay, so that's the statistics view. It's pretty cool stuff. There's actually about 20 stats here that are recorded by Profitrace. So as long as it's plugged in and active, it will be recording these statistics, so you can look at your fastest, slowest data exchange interval, for example, to see how quick or slow your network is going. You can check your I/O size. You can check lots of great stuff. So diagnostic messages requested by master, requested by slave, all that stuff. Okay, so lots of statistics, but the main ones are really the ones up here at the beginning, where you have syncs, retries, and station lost. Another thing that you can do with Profitrace is to look at the messages that are being sent on the bus. So if I click on the messages tab here to the right of the live list, I can click on start message recording, which means Profitrace is going to start recording the messages that are going on the bus. Now you'll notice this blue line advancing across the bottom of the window there. That is basically the memory filling up with the messages that it's recording. So you can see that it won't be long now before that'll reach the end and we'll stop recording. You can of course set it to record the last however many messages, rotating out of the buffer, so you can see the latest messages. However, that may not be very useful if you actually had a problem. So because the messages that were going on at the time of the problem will be long gone by the time you look at the messages tab. So what we really like to tell people to do here, I'm going to stop message recording, is to set up what they call a record trigger. So there's a button just to the left of set up message recording that is a record trigger. So I can go here to the record trigger and I can say enabled, and then I click on I can click on retrigger, which means if this event that I'm triggering on happens again, record messages again. And then I could say, for example, let's record 15 messages before the trigger and 15 messages after the trigger. And then I can say set up trigger. And in this case, let's just say when the station goes lost, we want to record. So OK and OK. So now I can say start message recording again. And it clears out my buffer and it's waiting for a trigger event to happen. So just to show you what would happen in that event, I will power off my Phoenix again, and boom, you will now see 15 messages before and after the event being this one that's marked here with the lost, which comes on the last repeat or retry message. So what happens when a device drops off the bus, there's a bus parameter in Profibus that says how many times would I like to send a message if a device fails to respond. That's called a retry. Normally it's defaulted to 1. We usually recommend a little bit higher number than that. In this case it is set to 5. It really depends on your PLC program and how fast it has to run and all that good stuff. But anyway, if you set your repeats greater than 1, it can help avoid some nuisance problems in Profibus. In this case it's set to 5, so the master sent the message 5 times after my Phoenix dropped off the bus, and on the 5th time he said, OK, you are lost. And so then he would start to send a sync message to that device on the next cycle. If I were to cause another event, I'll turn off the Siemens. And now here in my message file, I can scroll down a little bit. You'll see here's the sync message for my 15 that I had turned off. And now, here's our Acme device. That's address 125. That's what this 2 to 125 is. So he's repeating his messages to him. And then 24 up here is the Siemens. So we actually had three events because remember my Acme device 125 followed my Siemens. And it just so happened that the master noticed him first falling off the bus. Okay, so here we see that the data exchange going on here, and the device. So this field here tells you who sent the message and who received it. So in this case, here's a message from address 2, that's our master, to the device at address 36. And over here on the right, the 6A and hex is the data that was sent. And then coming back is a bunch of zeros, and that's the 36 with the arrow pointing back to the 2. So write outputs, read inputs, write outputs, read inputs, write outputs, read inputs. And if everything's working fine, it would just do that over and over again for all 5 devices. In this case, we've lost one. Now it is sending a sync to that Siemens every time it's his turn to respond in the cycle. Okay, so you can look at messages to also help you figure out what's going on with your network. That's all well and good. Profitrace is a powerful tool, and the live list is certainly something that you want to be aware of. However, most problems in Profibus are caused by physical layer problems, and by that I mean the cabling issues, terminating resistors, shielding, grounding, EMC, so things like that can cause problems with this high-speed data communication cable, that's Profibus cable. And So what I'd like to do is to get into the scopeware for a moment and show you how scopeware works. So you really can't tell what's going on your network without an oscilloscope. So this 90% of the problems I'm referring to, you may see the symptoms in Profitrace. You may see some drops, some messages dropped, the repeat messages and stations going lost and coming back, but you won't be able to really find the source of the problem if it's a physical layer thing without an oscilloscope. So when I click on the Scopeware tab, it's up here in the left corner next to the Profitrace tab. Now we see our live running scope in this scope screen here. And then underneath it, you'll see this familiar live list that we saw before. Just to show you, 125 is down there. I just stretched the screen a little bit. And we have our scope running up here above it. So the cool thing is I can click on any one of these devices in my live list. I'll click on the Phoenix, for example, and it will freeze a message from that device, or it's triggering on it, I should say, and it's showing that in the window. So every message that's leaving the Phoenix is being triggered on and being shown on our screen. It's dancing around a little bit. There's a little jitter from the timing being slightly different on each cycle. But pretty much it's the same messages because of the way the PLC is programmed, so the master's program. So it's just the same bits going back and forth every time. And so that's why it looks pretty steady. Now, if I were to introduce a problem, let's say, for example, I turn off a terminating resistor, which I'll reach over here and do now, excuse me. So there, I just turned off a terminating resistor, and now we see what we call a reflection in the bits. So that's this stuff at the beginning of each of these bits. That's energy that's being reflected back from the far end of the bus whenever this Phoenix sends a message. So he sends a message, and bits are bouncing back from the other end of the bus and coming at him. And it shows up in his bits. Now, right now, everything is still green. As you can see underneath, the Profibus is a pretty good technology here, so it's robust and able to handle this missing terminator. But I have a pretty small network here. It's just a training kit. On a larger network or with more cable, it might be causing problems. But for my little network, everything's working great. But you do see what we look for in the scope is if the reflections go towards this 0 volt line. So up here represents a 1 bit, and down here is a couple of 0 bits and a 1 and a 0 and a couple of 1s and so on. And if this reflection here were to get close enough to 0, when the device's UARTs are testing these bits, they check 4 times per bit to see if if the sample is a 1 or a 0. And when the reflection gets close to 0, if any one of those samples is off, it will cause a bit error, and then it's party time, as we like to say. There will start to be problems on your bus. So right now this reflection is not harming me, but I would like to figure out what it is and also to get rid of it. So what we can do with, this is the cool part of the scope, what I can do with my scopeware is to click on this freeze button, and then you can change the time scale, which really in effect is zooming in or zooming out on any one of those bits. So I'll just zoom in a little bit here. Let me slide over so we can, see that, and make the screen a little bit bigger here. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is turn on this thing called cursors, and you'll see these cursors show up. What I'd like to do is take this bottom cursor, in the case if you're looking at a 0 bit, and put the bottom cursor, line it up over here on the right where the bit settles down. So the reflection kind of dampens out. And what we want to do with them with these vertical cursors is to line it up where our yellow reflection crosses this horizontal line that we just laid down where the bit settles down. So it's hard to be completely exact, but you can get pretty darn close. So I'm going to put one there and one about there. And we will see over here, the cool thing here is the distance read out in meters away from the device that we're looking at. So what this means is that my problem is 4.6 meters away from whatever device I'm looking at. In this case, I'm looking at address 15, which if you recall, or you can look down here in the live list, is the Phoenix contact. So I know that the problem is not here at my Phoenix, but it is 4.6 meters of cable away. Now, if you've ever did any troubleshooting on a Profibus network, you will know that when a device has a problem, the bus fault lights goes on. And what happens in most places is people will run down to the device that has the red LED and start changing things. They'll change the connector, they'll change the cable, they'll change the card, they'll change the connector again, and so on. And no matter what they do, the red LED stays lit. This is because the device that has the LED on is not the problem, but it is suffering from the problem. So in this case, the problem's on the other end of the bus, but those reflections, by the time they get to the device at the other end, are so bad that he is no longer able to communicate with the master. So this device basically is putting on his bus fault light and telling us, hey, I can't talk anymore, there's too much noise on this bus. But of course it's not really telling us that. But in a sense it is, and we can figure that out now using our scopeware. So this is another fantastic part of ProfiTrace that really lets you nail down where any problems in your network might be. Okay. So a few other things before we wrap up the little demonstration here for today. I'm going to turn my terminating resistor back on, and I'll unfreeze this thing, and we can zoom ourselves back out. Oops. And this looks familiar like what we saw before. Okay. So the next part I wanted to show you is quickly the bar graph. Now the bar graph is measuring the amplitude of our signal coming from each device. So here we see the signal at address 2, which also happens to be where I've connected our ProfiCore Ultra to be the strongest, which I would expect. And it does kind of, devices further away have a little less strength in signal. But if you look at the scopeware, what we're really measuring here is the top of the 1-bit down to the bottom of the 0-bit. So we see the top of the 1-bit here about 3 volts, the bottom of the 0-bit about 2.5, give or take. So let's say roughly 5.5 volts. This is address 15 we're looking at. So if I were to go to the bar graph, look at address 15, look, we're at about 5.5 volts. So this is telling me that. Now what's important about that? Well, if you recall, I mentioned that if you have reflections and they cause problems when they get close to 0. So we have drawn this little red line here at 2.5 volts. Basically that's 1.25 volts either side of 0. So back to the scopeware. We've drawn a red line that represents a signal that might be 1.25 volt here and 1.25 volt there. Now you remember that reflection that we saw when I turned the terminating resistor off. If the signal level for this device were down that low, then that reflection would have caused bit errors and all kinds of problems. So we would have been party time, and we would have had problems. So it's a nice graphical way to check your signal levels of all your devices to see if there are any potential problems lurking. Everything looks good in this installation, as I would expect. It's a short network with not a lot of devices. Everything is well above that 2.5 volt line, but if you have a network and things are starting to get down there, you might consider doing some things to boost your voltage back up, one of which might be to add a repeater or shorten the cable lengths or whatever you need to do. Okay. The last part I would like to show you that's included in the troubleshooting kit Ultra Plus is the topology scan. So what I'm going to do next is calculate our topology. What a topology is basically a drawing of our installation. It tells us who is connected to who in this daisy chain of Profibus cables. And what you have to do when you start this up is to select where on the bus you are connected. In this case, you remember I plugged my ProfiCore Ultra onto the PG connector on the PLC or the master. So I'm on the master, and everything is running. It also gives you a few warnings here. The one that really is of note is that this topology detection only works on 500 kilobits or 1.5 megabits. So if you have a faster or slower network than that, then this tool will not work well for you. It is a very difficult thing to do to measure the topology, and so you have to have a pretty clean network when you run it, and then you can rely on the results pretty well. But if there is some reflections and noise on your network when you try to run topology, it will get confused by those reflections because it's trying to basically measure the distance in much the way the scopeware did, but without a human helping to figure out how far away devices are. So what we're going to do here is run the topology, and I'll show you what it can do. And here it is calculating the distances between the devices. And again, we have just a small training kit, and so it's not a lot of cable. So you'll notice here we have about 2 meters here, 1 meter, 1 meter, 1 meter, 1 meter, about 7 meters of cable total in my installation. And this says 2 is connected to 15, which goes to 125, to address 36, 52, and 24. So now I have a map of my installation. You can generate a report up here using the report function, where you can print all this stuff out and save it for future reference. And then, when you do have a problem and you use the scopeware to determine it's 4 meters away or whatever it is, 100 meters away, you'll know from your diagram here where exactly you need to go. Okay, so I think that concludes our demonstration for Profi-Trace for today. Please join us for future videos, and thanks for your time.